Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for being with us this evening. My name is Kristen Lillyman, and I'm an engagement specialist with Dillon Consulting, and I'm going to be your facilitator for this evening. We have been working with the city to coordinate and facilitate the engagement for the Municipal Comprehensive Review, or as you may know it, our Plan Toronto. Many of you may have attended or participated in meetings with the city in the past on the official plan in the fall or in recent meetings on specifically on environment and climate change policies that were held in April. This is the third meeting in a series of meetings to present some other draft policies, the draft vision and directions and principles, and some of which will go to Planning and Housing Committee on July 5th. Next slide. So we'll begin tonight with a land acknowledgement. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Acknowledging the land is really only a small piece of recognizing the contributions and the history of Indigenous peoples, as well as our ongoing learning and progress towards reconciliation. It is also very important to recognize that the Indigenous connection to the land that we now call Toronto, as well as Lake Ontario, date back at least 10,000 years. A key part of our Plan Toronto is and has been the integration of Indigenous voices, perspectives, history, and understandings as part of this process. The team has also integrated the great work on the Reconciliation Action Plan into this draft renewed official plan vision. And you will hear more about that towards the end of the presentation. Next slide. So the agenda for tonight. So tonight it includes a background and the refresher on the official plan, especially in case you missed some of those earlier meetings. We'll provide an overview of the major transit station areas, an update on the employment policies and employment area conversions, an overview of the Indigenous planning perspectives, and also the draft official plan vision statement, directions, and principles. And you'll see on the agenda that there's about 10 minutes between each section for questions and discussion. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll share some next steps with you and how you can continue to be engaged. And we'll try to have the meeting wrapped up by 8 p.m. tonight. The next slide. So a few introductions of who is joining us tonight. So we're joined today by those at the city who are leading the official plan, including Jeff Cantos, who will now ask to introduce the city team.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Welcome, everyone. As Kristen said, my name is Jeff Cantos. I'm the manager of the city's official plan team that is undertaking the review of our official plan, or the Municipal Comprehensive Review. And I'm joined by a number of city staff that are with me, and they'll be actively working the chat room. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat room. And so with me there from the official plan team is Kyle Farron, Cole Solish, Ali Darwish. From the team working on major transit station areas, there is Dan Godden and Liam O'Toole. And from economic development, we have Rebecca Condon. And lastly, one of our staff members working on expanding housing options in neighborhoods, or EHON, is Philip Parker. And again, so it covers a series of different policy matters that we would be happy to, they'll be very happy to answer your questions in the chat. Okay, Kristen, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And so from Dillon Consulting, along with myself as your facilitator, we also have Daniel Huang and Ying Yi, who will be helping to manage the meeting from behind the scenes. You may also see their names in the chat if there are any specific engagement questions. They'll also be taking the meeting minutes for this evening. So I'd also love to welcome participants. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know who's joining us this evening, and you can also get to know each other. Next slide. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of housekeeping for this evening. So just a reminder to stay muted if you're not talking. If you do have a question or comment, please use the raise hand function or type your question into the chat box. There will be dedicated discussion points throughout the presentation to address hands raised and questions in the comment box. And I will ask, if you are speaking, please introduce yourself before asking your question. So you may have noticed also that the meeting is being recorded today. We are only going to post the presentation component online. The discussion and conversation that we have tonight will just be used for note-taking purposes only. So a few thoughts about my role as meeting facilitator. My job is to manage the discussion and make sure everyone gets a chance to be heard. To ensure that everyone is able to participate, I will ask that you think about and raise the one question that you really want to have answered. We strongly suggest one question per person, and you will be held accountable to that. If you don't get your question answered live tonight, the Q&A will be in our engagement records posted at toronto.ca/ourplan. Next slide. So just some participant guidelines. Again, we do welcome your questions and discussion and feedback, but there are no bad questions. Chances are if you have it, many others on the call also have it. We also want to hear from everybody. So we believe that everyone has wisdom and experience to share. With that being said, there probably will be differences in opinion. So please be respectful and listen. The city is here to listen today to your thoughts, feedback, perspectives, so please don't be shy and share your comments with us. Next slide. So just a little note on the chat function. As we mentioned, the chat box will be open and available throughout the meeting. We are encouraging use of the chat box to share ideas, get to know each other, ask your questions. And the city project team and the Dillon team will be monitoring the chat and will try to respond to questions live when they can. And just a reminder to be respectful in the chat. We want to keep it active, but if there are disrespectful or abusive comments, we will close the chat. Next slide. So why are we here tonight on this beautiful evening? Well, city staff are going to provide an overview of the employment policies, the major transit station area delineations, and the draft vision, directions, and principles. We also really want to hear your feedback. So that's why we're here. We want to open up to questions and to dialogue. And then again, we're going to share next steps with you and how you can continue to be engaged on the project. Next slide. So this slide provides a quick snapshot of the project process. The project initially launched in May last year, and we've gone through parts 1, vision and priorities, and part 2, asking big questions and setting policy directions. And during that time, the city and our Dillon engagement team were doing a lot of listening through public meetings, youth engagement, online engagement and surveys, meetings with Indigenous rights holders and organizations, and through a community leaders circle. Now we're at the point in part 3 where the city has created some draft policies, and we are continuing to meet with people and organizations to discuss our plan Toronto and to present that vision and get feedback. So far in part 3, we have held meetings on the draft environment and climate change policies, which went to the May 31st Planning and Housing Committee, and that was followed by, actually, I guess it's coming up, June 15th, City Council. So we are now hosting a series of public meetings on some of the other draft policies that we're going to present tonight, which is all leading to Planning and Housing Committee on July 5th. We're going to share some other upcoming meeting dates with you closer to the end of the presentation. Next slide. So in part 1 and part 2, and so far in part 3, we have held over 60 meetings and met with over 2,000 people, including various internal and external stakeholders, organizations, companies, and residents. And this work has included a focus on reaching underrepresented populations and groups that work with them. So that was including Indigenous rights holders and organizations, youth through schools and school boards, seniors through the Seniors Roundtable, and we had some focus conversations like around accessibility and some specific geographies like Scarborough. We also had an online component, and the Our Plan website and our story maps, which is an online resource to explore information and maps related to Our Plan Toronto, have received over 10,000 visits. Next slide. So here are some key themes that we have received over the course of the engagement. And our team has organized all of this input into some key themes, and some of those themes are we call cross-cutting themes, which are themes that came forward in every meeting across different organizations and groups in different communities, with Indigenous communities. And what emerged was having a few things, but having a focus on equity, inclusion, and relationship building. And that includes addressing inequities across the city, be more inclusive, reflect the diversity of the city, require universal and accessible design. Another theme was community-led solutions. So working collaboratively with communities, especially when it came to big change in neighborhoods like big development. Another theme was learning from the past and implementation. So understanding the history of communities and the history of issues. And lastly, aligning priorities and conversations. So getting everyone on the same page, and that included leadership alignment. So the other themes in the darker green on the right-hand side of your screen, they were the most frequently discussed issues. So issues like housing affordability and scale of intensification, the need to balance development with infrastructure like green space and transit, environment and climate change. So we had meetings on that specifically in April, and within that theme included a plan to get to net zero, promoting active transportation, protecting green space and trees, jobs. So that was particularly heightened through COVID, safety and complete communities, where every neighborhood needs a complete communities approach, and they need to have universal design so people don't age out. Next slide. So now we're going to have an engagement moment. So we can go to the next slide. We are going to have some live polling throughout the meeting this evening. So if you can use your smartphone or your desktop, and you can go to menti.com. If someone can put that website in the chat, please, so you can click on it. You could also scan the QR code that is in front of you. And once you have menti.com open, you can enter the code that is on the screen. So the code is 5339203. So please, everyone, go to menti.com. We're going to have some questions throughout the night. Some questions will initially be just to get to know our audience and know your history with the official plan and our Plan Toronto project. And then there'll also be some chances for you to provide feedback on what you're being presented with, and also some questions to test that you are paying attention tonight. So maybe we can go to the Mentimeter poll. I'll give everyone a chance to get online. So the first question is, where are you participating from? So not surprisingly, so far we have the majority from North York, which this meeting is specifically hosted for. And we have some from Toronto East York and one from outside of Toronto. We'll give it another minute to let other people log on to menti.com and vote. So again, you can do this from your desktop or your smartphone. It seems like a lot of you are getting in. That's great. Okay, so majority here from North York. Okay, thank you for joining us, everyone. So next, maybe we'll go to the next question. So this question is just to understand if you have participated in our Plan Toronto engagement activities in the past. We have yes, no, and not sure. So far we have many people who are joining us again, and so welcome back. Thank you for participating with us again. And we have many people who it's their first time participating in an Our Plan Toronto event. So welcome and thank you for being here tonight. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So this is a question for those of you who have participated previously. There's some options here for you to share how you participated. So if you attended a citywide virtual meeting like the one tonight, attended other virtual meetings like stakeholder meetings, completed an online survey, if you're a member of the Community Leaders Circle, if it was online through the website or social media, or if you visited the story map, and you can select all that apply. Okay, so we have many people who've attended some virtual meetings, and some people who completed an online survey, visited the story map. That's great. Okay, maybe we'll go to the next slide. So this is in general, the Toronto official plan. How familiar are you with it, with the document of the official plan? So not at all familiar, slightly familiar, moderately familiar, very familiar, or extremely familiar. So far we have many of you moderately familiar and some not at all, which is totally fine. We are going to give an official plan refresher at the beginning of this presentation. So it's good for us to know how many people may not be at all familiar with it. And we have a couple people who are very or extremely familiar. Okay, great. So we'll go to the next question. So this is if you currently use the Toronto official plan, how do you use it? So are you using it as a resident, as a member of a group or organization like a residents association, for work? If you're a student and so you're using it in maybe planning school, there's other components that you might be using it for another reason or are not sure. So many people are just using it as a resident or as a member of a group or organization, and a few for work and a few as a student. Okay, maybe we'll go to the next question. I think actually that was it, I think, for our first round of questions, but do keep Mentimeter open either on your phone or your desktop. Again, we will come back to it throughout the evening. So for now, I will hand the presentation over to Jeff. We will go to the next slide, and I'll hand it over to Jeff to provide the official plan refresher.
Great, thanks, Kristen. And again, welcome everyone, and thanks for being part of those polls. Like Kristen said, it's really helpful in reading the room and understanding how deep I should go into the official plan refresher. So on this first slide, you see on the bottom right, there's us, the City of Toronto, but we're nestled into in the middle, what's called the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, that has about a population of about 10.2 million. And the Greater Golden Horseshoe area includes us, the City of Toronto, and our neighboring municipalities that reaches beyond our borders and goes into our neighbors, York Region, Durham Region, Peel Region, and other regions and municipalities, all the way to Peterborough and as far south as the Niagara region. And we're obviously nestled into the province of Ontario, which last year had a population of 14.7 million people, whereas we here in the city account for about 2.8 million of that. And in the next slide, in Ontario, the overarching planning direction comes from the province and is filtered or implemented in local planning documents and decisions. So this slide shows the nestling of the land use system within which we work. So it's a policy-based system. So at the very top tier are the matters of provincial interests that are found in the Planning Act, or what's called the Provincial Policy Statement. And further into the middle, the next kind of nestled rung is plans for regional growth. So the province sets out what's called the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe area. Again, that area between Peterborough and Niagara, including us. And there's also the Greenbelt Plan, also released by the province. And somewhere in the middle is us. What we're here talking about is a citywide vision, and therein lies the Toronto official plan, and how these broader higher arching policies are implemented are through area priorities, the next kind of nestled layer in the blue, the secondary plans, local area studies or precinct plans, and then further down in the yellow is area specific implementation. So there are citywide zoning bylaws, area specific bylaws, and then all the way down to the building itself, which are the zoning bylaw standards, the height, the number of parking spaces, and other details. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to focus on the official plan. And the official plan is the city planning document that council adopts. It is Toronto's roadmap for land use matters. So it does set out our long-term vision for and shared values for land use. It puts together policies to help guide decision-making on land development, economic growth, environment, and more. So it's really important that we keep this document updated, and it's important for us to continue to review it together to help determine what changes are needed. And so a part of tonight's meeting and part of the work that we're doing is a provincial requirement. The province requires municipalities within the Greater Golden Horseshoe area to review their official plans to ensure that it conforms with the provincial regional plans. So that growth plan that the province set out, again, nestled right under the Planning Act, was recently changed, and the changes that the province did it triggers the municipalities to ensure that our official plans conform to provincial regional plans. And in the growth plan, the province sets out population and job forecasts for cities to demonstrate that we have a plan in place that accommodates this growth. So for City of Toronto, the forecasted growth for us is 700,000, a minimum of 700,000 people, and a minimum number of 450,000 jobs that we have to demonstrate that we have a plan that conforms to those numbers. Okay, next slide, please. So when looking at the official plan is broken up in various chapters. The 5 chapters that have the bulk of the policies are those different gears, and the largest gear in the bottom in the middle is the chapter 4 of land use designations. And so land use designations are reflected in the map in the bottom right that basically curves up the city in different types of land use designations and has associated policies to it. And on the next slide, these land use designations, if we took the City of Toronto and we broke it down into 100 blocks, we would find that there are about 35% of the city is designated as what we're called as neighborhoods. There's about 19% of the city that are roads, so at the top of the 100 blocks, and there are no land use designations on our roads, on our public roads. And at the bottom there, the land use designations of mixed use areas, the red, are about 5%, and the purple lands, core employment areas and general employment areas, account for about 13% of the city. So these are our land use designations that have associated policies for them within the official plan in Chapter 4. Next slide, please. Over to you, Kristen.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So we're going to go to a polling question. So we'll go to Mentimeter again. So pull out your smartphone or go to your desktop application, and we'll go to our next question. And this is a bit of testing if you were paying attention to Jeff's presentation, and you can select all that apply. So what is the official plan? So if you look through the options, is it a roadmap for planning in Toronto? Does it set the long-term vision for the city? Does it direct where development should go? Does it provide the building blocks for complete communities, or all of the above? So we have so far many of you who have said all of the above. and one person who sets the long-term vision for the city. So technically you are all right because it is all of the above, so all of those answers are correct. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide, which brings us, so I'm going to hand it over to Dan to provide the presentation for the major transit station areas and protected major transit station areas.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So yeah, as Kristen mentioned, I'm going to walk you through some of the work we've been doing identifying and delineating the major transit station areas and protected major transit station areas in the city. This is a major component of the intensification strategy of the MCR, or the Municipal Comprehensive Review. The province, their growth plan requires us to delineate all transit stations that are either subway stations or that are identified in the growth plan as a priority transit corridor. Next slide. Oh, next slide, please. Thanks. So across Toronto, there's approximately 140 of these major transit station areas. And this consists of all the subway, LRT, and GO stations around the city, or the planned ones as well. A major transit station area includes basically any property within a 10-minute walk of a transit station. So that's about 500 to 800 meters. Basically, if you can open up your door, leave your school or your office and get to the transit station within about 10 minutes, that area would be included within the Ntsa. So the growth plan requires a municipality to ensure that the land use policy within that 10-minute walking distance ensures higher levels of density, which is measured in people and jobs. For subway stations, we need to demonstrate that we have a planned minimum density of 200 people and jobs per hectare. For light rail transit, that is 160 people and jobs per hectare. And for GO, or regional transit, it's 150 people and jobs per hectare. So those density targets are the minimum set by the province in the growth plan. So in a lot of areas in Toronto's planning framework, you can already build higher densities than that. And in the interest of providing more housing, there might be areas, or just providing more density in strategic locations, there might be areas of the city where those densities are higher and may become higher. So the overall intent of this policy is to make sure that we're planning for higher levels of density in areas that are close to transit and walkable to transit. So making sure that we're using, the transit infrastructure that's in place, or that we're building, most efficiently, and to encourage as many people to use sustainable modes of transportation, like public transit. So next slide. So each one of these stations needs to be delineated based on things like local conditions, constraints, the landscape around it. And so this map, if you squint, you can see that it shows, all of the draft delineations that have been brought forward to Planning and Housing Committee for consultation, and the number is around 140. Just a note, in Scarborough, in the Shepherd East LRT, no longer needs to be delineated. It's no longer a priority project at this time. So we've just received this during the process. And so that's that little box in gray on the map there. Let's skip to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the PMTSAs, or Protected Major Transit Station Areas. But before I get into that, I really have to introduce inclusionary zoning. So inclusionary zoning is the city's ability to require a percentage of affordable housing in developments of a certain size. The goals of inclusionary zoning are to increase the supply of affordable housing while continuing to encourage market housing development by supporting a diverse range of housing supply. Ultimately, the goal of this is to create more inclusive, complete, and equitable communities by applying, percentages and requirements within these PMTSAs for affordable housing. So in November 2021, Council approved a new inclusionary zoning bylaw that was supported by a market area analysis of land value across the city. So if you look at the map here, the blue areas on the map show the areas where the market can support increased rates of required affordable housing units. And the darker blue indicates greater capacity to absorb that in those areas, and it kind of gradiates out from there. So moving back to PMTSAs, PMTSA is the only place that you can apply inclusionary zoning, and this is a rule of the city, or sorry, this is a provincial policy. So the city can only apply inclusionary zoning in these areas. Protected major transit station areas will be kind of a subset of the 140 major transit station areas you see across the city. So on this map, the yellow dots are all the stations where we've identified potential PMTSAs. And these are just the areas where there's an overlap with the market areas 1, 2, or 3. These different market areas are based on their capacity to absorb the requirements while still ensuring that development is viable. So once these are approved as PMTSAs by the province, we will be able to use the inclusionary zoning bylaws in those areas. Next slide. So in the next couple slides, I'm just going to describe a bit of our process for how we defined and how we're refining these MTSAs. We're approaching it kind of through a two-step strategy. So in step 1, which is our starting point, basically where we are today, we're trying to demonstrate basically that the MTSAs they conform to the growth plan, to the requirements of the growth plan. So what this does is it establishes the minimum densities that the growth plan requires at all of the MTSAs and PMTSAs. We need to do that by the rules of the province. But it's worth reiterating that these are, again, minimums within those areas. So what we have today, we're demonstrating that more than 90% of our MTSAs already, under the current planning rules, meet or exceed the province's requirements. There are a few stations where we've requested lower targets, for various reasons, often, because they're beside a large park or, within a university. There's a variety of reasons why the station might have a lower target. There's also a few where the existing planning framework doesn't allow for the density that the province directs. So in those, we need to do local area studies. So there's things like the Danforth Planning Study and Golden Mile. And those targets might adjust based on those studies. Okay, and then in the future, we might revisit. There's the potential to revisit some of the PMTSAs if the density within them doesn't achieve the planning objectives. But at this point, what we're going through right now is essentially a kind of a conformity exercise to demonstrate that we meet the growth plan requirements in these areas. So next slide. So just a quick recap on the progress we've made to date on this. So far, we've brought over 130 draft protected major transit station areas and MTSAs before Planning and Housing Committee for consultation. We've also brought forward 18 final protected major transit station areas, which have been adopted by Council and are currently awaiting provincial ministerial approval. So 16 of those are downtown and 2 are at Keelfinch. Beyond the stations we've brought to committee and council, we've also identified 6, as I described earlier, that don't allow us to meet the minimum, and those require further study. So reporting, we're targeting the July 5th Planning and Housing Committee to report on the PMTSAs. So next slide. So on the Our Plan Toronto website, there is a link you can find there, and that will take you to the interactive MTSA engagement tool. And so in the next few slides, I'll just walk you through how that works. So after you visit that link, you can scroll down, and there's a number of pages of background information, essentially what I've just described right now, but you can read through it on your own time as well. Or if you need reference, it's all there. So you keep scrolling through that information. And next slide. You will eventually arrive at a map and a set of infographics as well. So on this map, you search in the search box on the upper left, and you just type in the station that you're interested in, and then select it from the list. And then once you select it from the list, you'll see a map showing the boundary of the MTSA or PMTSA, as well as some stats about the station. There's also more information and notes at the very bottom of that, just under the bar graph. Next slide. So after selecting a station, those stats will update based on the relevant information for a station area. So you'll see 2016 population. That was the most recent census that we have available at this time, and the size of the MTSA in hectares, the planned density, as well as the proposed minimum density target. So as I was mentioning earlier, sometimes we can go a bit higher than the province's requirement, or quite a bit higher if it's in a particularly dense area. So this one at Bay, the planned density is actually 936 people and jobs per hectare. So we're proposing a minimum density of 900, but the required target from the province for a subway is 200. Next slide. Again, similarly, the station just shows various densities. So there's the, on the far left, there's the current estimated density based on current conditions in 2016. There's the provincial target. There's the planned density, so that means approved development in the area, as well as the planning permissions. And then our proposed target. Next slide. So on the map side of it, you can also play around with the layers. If you look at the top right side of the map, there's a layers button. And if you click on that, it'll have a little drop-down menu where you can choose, you can turn on and off things like the zoning bylaw, as well as the densities for the area. So you can play around with those to see the information you might be most interested in within an MTSA. Next slide. So down at the bottom on the right-hand side, if you click there, there's a couple of tabs, and under those you can see more details on a particular MTSA. So that will include links to supporting documents like the draft official plan amendment. If there's a relevant secondary plan, you'll see that there. You'll see the status now of it. So most of them that you'll see are draft for consultation. As well as some stats just in table form that you see above in the infographic. Next slide. So the last piece of this, and maybe the most important part, is the comment form. So if you scroll just below the map, there's a spot for you to provide your comments. The one thing we ask you to do, though, is select your station name. It can be easy to miss, so make sure you're choosing the right station that you want to provide comments on, because if someone provides us comments on changing the delineation or the boundaries of a particular station, it's obviously very important for us to know which station you're referring to. So just double check that you're using the right station up there. And that's it for me.
Hey, thank you, Dan. And we'll go to the next slide. I believe we have another engagement moment. So you can get up your Mentimeter on your phone or on your desktop, and you'll go to the next few questions. So our first question is about if you live or work near an identified MTSA, and also you can also say I don't know or no. So many of you so far live near one. A few of you don't know, and there was a link to the tool that Dan just walked you through. There was a link in the chat, and you can check that out, and you can kind of see where they all are, and you can click to learn more about them as well, as you saw. So you might want to explore that after. Okay, so most people on the call, or at least those that are participating in the Mentimeter, are do live near one. So maybe we'll go to the next question. So this is the tool that Dan walked you through. Is have you used that MTSA story map on our plan website before? So yes, no, I will after this meeting, and I don't know. Okay, so many of you are going to check it out after this meeting. That's great. Some of you have already checked it out, and many of you have not, but I encourage all of you to check it out again on the link that's in the chat. Okay, we'll go to the next question. So those minimum people and job targets. So this is a question if you think that they should be increased over the minimums. So yes, no, and I don't know. It's kind of a split between yes, no, and then a couple people I don't know. Okay. So that was the last polling question for this section. Please continue to keep it open because we will have more questions coming up.
Great, thank you, Kristen. So I'm going to talk about another component of our study, or the official plan review on employment policies and conversion requests. But to start off, I just wanted to make a statement and describe the statement that employment areas, these are the 13% of the city that were colored purple in the 100 grid. So 13% of our city is designated core employment areas and general employment areas. And these employment areas do serve the public interest. They provide low barrier entry jobs for newcomers to Canada, those who face challenges having the professional credentials recognized upon arrival, or even those that are here. And these lands also provide pathways to prosperity for individuals whose first language is not English. We know that the employment opportunities that are provided on these lands provide a living wage in the local community. And we do know, and we have experience of through COVID, some of our busiest transit routes during the height of COVID when we were locked down, and those that didn't have the privilege to be able to work from home, some of our busiest transit routes were our surface buses up in Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke, connecting people from where they live to where they had to go to work to do their, to do what we call essential workers, providing the goods and services that we all need to as part of our daily lives. Okay, next slide, please. So going back to that idea of nestling, the province of Ontario, in the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, has a map, and this map identifies what are known as provincially significant employment zones. So the province sets out and identifies these provincially significant employment zones. Whereas in the middle on the slide, the City of Toronto, we designate 13% of our city as either core employment areas or general employment areas. So this makes up 8,100 hectares of the city's land mass, again, 13%, and it accommodates over 400,000 jobs. So that's 25% of all the jobs across the city. So these lands do a lot of heavy lifting. And in terms of manufacturing, industrial, and warehousing jobs across the city, 92% of those type of jobs are found within our employment areas. Next slide, please. As part of the process, we hired a consultant. They're named Hemson. They are experts in the land economics. And we can put the link to their study in the chat. So it's a really long study, and it's very, it did a deep dive on past trends, how we were faring during COVID in terms of our economy. And they gave us about 20 recommendations. And these, I put some of them on the slides. I won't go through them all. But again, we can put the link in the chat. But it talks about what they recommended to us was preserving lands near major goods movement and facilities corridor. It talked about establishing minimum employment densities for employment areas and a slew more. But I can talk about 3 on the next slide, please, of the recommendations. Through their analysis, they too found that our employment areas are important in achieving the city's equity goals, particularly given where they're located and some near to our neighborhood improvement areas. And those neighborhood improvement areas, or the NIAs, are areas in the city that have not experienced as much public investment in them, and then require them. In terms of office, what our consultants recommended to us, or they told us it's too early for us, the city, to make drastic policy changes as it relates to office, given that office practices are moving slowly towards return to office, but a little bit of hybrid, and the return to work trends should be monitored before we actually make policy changes to how we regulate office across the city. So so we'll be monitoring our office market, which plays a really large role in the city's economy. And lastly, another key finding from Hemson, our consultants, was that in the 13% of our employment areas across the city, the value of new industrial building permits averaged over $48 million annually since 2000. And so it's an interesting metric in that when a landowner wants to build something on their land, they have to apply for a building permit. The value of that building permit the value of the building permit is directly related to the complexity of the proposal. And so about $48 million annually is the value of the permits that that the building official issues. In terms of additions and renovations, those permits, that's a different type of permit. We range about $39 million per year for the last almost 20 years. And for structural and other permits, about $26 million per year. And so what this data finding tells us is that there is a level of confidence, and there's a great level of private investment in our employment areas. Okay, next slide, please. Another finding that our consultants told us in their report, and I know many of us are part of the phenomena of supporting e-commerce, and this is what, from a land use perspective, the functions of e-commerce is that it requires centrally situated sites with access to highways and major roads, and this is specifically to get the goods that we order to our doorsteps, within the 48-hour, 24-hour period that we want them in. And so we're proposing a new policy that helps to encourage the new multi-level industrial development, not the one on the screen. This is a new Amazon fulfillment center in Northeast Scarborough within our employment areas that generates a lot of jobs, the type of jobs that we're talking about. But there's also what we will require as we grow very dependent on e-commerce is the last mile fulfillment centers, and those should be close to us as in the urban market. Okay, next slide, please. What we're also doing is looking into what we're calling land use incompatibility. So the province also requires the municipalities to prohibit residential use in our 13% of employment areas. So there are existing about a dozen exceptions to the rule. So basically 12 pockets in the city where they are employment areas or part of that 13%, but there is an exception that allows residential uses. But because the province requires us to prohibit, we're doing a deep dive to look at these 12, 13 sites to see whether or not should they be retained as employment, or are they already residential that they should just no longer be part of the 13%. And so findings from this mini study will be going. We'll do an update in July, and then the final probably in early 2023. Next slide, please. This process that we're undertaking is the Municipal Comprehensive Review, which that's the way it's known from the province, but it is a landowner's ability to apply or submit what's called an employment conversion. And an employment conversion is the introduction of a non-permitted use into employment areas such as residential. Because again, today, residential is not permitted in employment areas, so landowner can make the request to the city only during a municipal comprehensive review. So members of my team and members of Economic and Development and Culture are carefully considering about or over 140 of these conversion requests. And the work that my team with Economic Development is undertaking is a very, very careful consideration of the area around the request, what type of businesses are on the lands themselves and the lands around them, how close is the residential. There are a number of provincial and city policy tests that we consider prior to city staff making a recommendation to City Council for adoption. And of the 140 requests that we received, they amount to about 685 hectares of land, which is about 8.5% of all of our employment areas. Again, 13% of the city's land mass. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows kind of the process of that careful consideration of these conversions that I mentioned. So members of my team have written and presented about 120 preliminary assessments to Planning and Housing Committee on the conversion requests. We undertake broad engagement. We've met with the proponents themselves, area businesses, stakeholders. We've also done some sector specific engagement with the food sector, the food and beverage sector, the industrial sector, just to make sure we heard and are listening. Members of my team are doing a very technical review, looking at the citywide analysis, and then, like I mentioned, a very site and area specific, what we call due diligence, just a lot of homework. And for July 5th, coming up, members of my team will be writing what we're calling final assessments for some of the 140 plus conversion requests that we received. So we won't be reporting on them all, but we will be reporting on a subset of them. The ones that we don't report on in July, they'll be going to the January meeting when City Council reconvenes. And when I say Council is going to adopt, so staff, we recommend, Council will adopt whether or not it gets converted or not, but then the Minister is the approval authority for these conversion requests as set out by the province's rules. And I think I'm going to pass it over to you, Kristen.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. So we'll go back to Mentimeter. We have one question for this section, and it's testing if you're paying attention. So the question is, what will protecting employment areas help with? You can select all that apply. So there's a few options there. There's jobs for newcomers, helping provide living wage jobs, providing space for businesses, Toronto's economic competitiveness, none of the above, or other. So I can see most people have probably selected all of the answers. We have one with none of the above, or two with none of the above, but the four first answers there, jobs for newcomers, helping provide a living wage jobs, supporting Toronto's economy, all of the answers were correct.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So as part of our official plan review, as part of our Plan Toronto, we wanted to take the opportunity to make sure that we were integrating and applying Indigenous planning perspectives in our review of the official plan. And so on the next slide, please. In April of this year, City Council unanimously adopted the Reconciliation Action Plan for 2022-2032, a 10-year plan. And we as planners, as land use planners, we want to ensure that as part of decolonizing our structures and our processes and our ways of knowing, that the official plan acknowledges that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their worldviews are very different from how we've been doing land use planning in Ontario with respect to their worldviews on land, sea, and water. And so we, in in applying and implementing the Reconciliation Action Plan, we wanted to ensure that we were consistent. We at the official plan team were consistent with the objectives set out in the Reconciliation Action Plan. And in doing so, in the next slide, we undertook broad-based engagement with treaty rights holders and organizations across the city. And so the list of rights holders are there in the slide, and then the list of Indigenous organizations working with Indigenous peoples here in Toronto are those that we spoke with or sent out a survey or had phone calls. And we also, members of my team and I also presented at different advisory boards, like the City of Toronto we have our own Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, and there is another, there's a committee called the Toronto Aboriginal Support Services Council with whom we've been consulting. And we've been doing this for a year and a bit. So on the next slide, so the process, how we did this. So, last year, we went to our Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee. We call it the AAAC, and we asked them how best should we be engaging Aboriginal peoples in First Nations and urban Indigenous organizations. And for almost 6, 7, 8 months, we were listening, learning, sharing with these groups in the Aboriginal First Nations. And, just for the last couple of months, we've been reflecting, we've been drafting words and then reflecting a little bit more. And next month, we will be presenting again at the AAAC on a draft statement that we would like to be including into the official plan. And then we will continue our engagement with Indigenous, the Indigenous peoples, the First Nations and their organizations over the course of after the July City Council meeting. And what we will be presenting is on the next slide, some of the planning perspectives that we'd like to include in the official plan. The first being that the official plan should recognize the importance and purpose of land use acknowledgements. And this is about not including a land acknowledgement in the OP in the official plan, but helping people realize the importance and the role that land acknowledgements play at the beginning of the meeting, just like we had this evening. And it's about it's important so that we can reflect on who was here before and how we can do things differently in the spirit of a reconciliation. In the second bullet, we want the official plan to amplify Indigenous voices in the planning processes. We want to be able to deepen an understanding of contemporary urban Indigenous issues, realities, and experiences. And we want to continue to identify opportunities for Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping, and concrete initiatives also in youth development, in new development. And we will be including a sidebar and explanatory text describing the Reconciliation Action Plan within the official plan. And on the next slide, I mentioned Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping. So this is a recommendation straight out of the Reconciliation Action Plan that we would like to include into the OP, into the official plan. And it speaks to what is Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping. And these are outcomes of initiatives that vary in size, scale, and scope, but are critical for the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples. And it's integral to truth, reconciliation, and justice, and it creates and nurtures space and in process and policy for ceremony, teaching, and community, and sharing, really. And it helps strengthen Indigenous connections with lands and water. And also for, from the perspective of, us settlers and immigrants and newcomers and those not yet here, it helps to build this cultural competency and capacity for land-based Indigenous engagement. And so we'd like the official plan to start off with these Indigenous planning perspectives. In the next slide, in terms of our next steps, again, in a couple of weeks, we'll be presenting to Toronto's Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee, and we will incorporate their feedback. We will seek their advice on how we should best continue our engagement, how we should refine the Indigenous planning perspectives that I just presented, and then hopefully be preparing a final report with a revised Chapter 1 in early 2023. Kristen, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. So we will go back to our Mentimeter for one poll on this section. So if everyone can get out their smartphones or their desktop application. And our question is, are you familiar with the city's reconciliation action plan that was recently adopted by City Council? So the options are yes, I'm familiar, no, I'm not, or I will look at it after the meeting. And I believe it has been linked to in the chat, so you can open that up and you can check it out.
Thanks, Kristen. This is the last mini presentation before we get into next steps and wrap up. And I'm going to talk about the draft vision statement and directions that me and members of my team have drafted for consultation. Again, through the engagement that we've had over the past, I think, year and a half. Again, all virtual. We embarked upon this project just before we got sent home in March 2020, and we've been at it for the last year and a half, all virtual. And so on the next slide, please, is kind of our collage of ideas put into one image. And there's many layers to this image, and it's a really busy image because there's a lot happening because we're a very big and complex city. And I will talk about each of the layers. So the Indigenous planning perspectives would be changes to our official plan chapter 1, and I'll talk about the other changes to the official plan chapter 1 in the next slide, please. So again, what we're tasked to do is to update our official plan with a planning horizon to 2051. And in doing so, we've crafted a draft vision statement for what the official plan should be doing. And here are the components that I'll go through one by one. The first being that the official plan should seek to eliminate disparities experienced by Torontonians. And I'll talk about that in a bit. The official plan should prioritize climate change action and sustainability towards net zero by 2040. And finally, the official plan should be the roadmap for Toronto to become the most inclusive city in the world. And I'll talk about each of these briefly, and then again, happy to take questions. So when I mentioned, eliminating disparities, what does this mean? This statement, this vision statement, means that we as Torontonians and our official plan should acknowledge that the post-pandemic recovery and rebuild must acknowledge that people's lived experience varied amongst Torontonians. Again, I mentioned those of us that have had the privilege to work at home versus those of us that needed to take transit to get to their jobs that we deemed essential over the pandemic. It also means us challenging the effects of land use planning and looking for what we call outcome-based direction. So things that meaningfully work to reduce the disparities experienced by Torontos and build up what's known as social cohesion. It also means building complete communities. Well, I've mentioned this before, trying to identify what makes a community incomplete is as important as building a complete community so that we can do the latter. And support opportunities for people of all ages and all abilities, again, to conveniently access most of the necessities for their daily life, including a mix of jobs, local stores, services, a full range of housing, including affordable and supportive housing, and many more. The next slide is about prioritizing climate change. We know that climate change is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, challenge facing our planet. And so our land use decisions should work towards achieving sustainability towards net zero by 2040. And this also includes prioritizing Indigenous worldviews and relational views of land protection around resiliency. I'll ask a member of my team to put in the link for the Transform TO initiative that talks about how we get to net zero by 2040. And on the next slide, where the official plan should be the roadmap to become the most inclusive city. Again, the 2051 vision is supposed to be aspirational. And we want Toronto to become the most inclusive city in the world. We know that development will continue to happen around us, and we want to create an inclusive city as more and more people choose Toronto as their home. I mentioned we're going to grow by a minimum of 700,000 people in 2051. We know that the federal government has set higher immigration targets, and we also know that Toronto has always been and continues to be a very, very attractive place for newcomers to settle into. And we want to make sure that we are as welcoming as possible. We want to make sure that there are pathways to prosperity for those who arrive and for those who are yet to arrive, to make sure that everyone's got good access to economic opportunities as well. And lastly, on the next slide, how do we get there? And part of our draft vision statement it includes 3 principles for a successful and inclusive city. And so what we believe is that a successful city building requires 3 key components. It's access, equity, and inclusion. So in terms of access, that's about improving access to many facets of daily life. So access to affordable housing, access to dignified housing for those experiencing homelessness, access to jobs, access to good transit, and from an employer's perspective, access to a good, strong labor force who can afford to live in the city that they will be working in. And in terms of equity, what we've been doing throughout this process is what we call applying an equity lens. And what that means is that we are identifying and removing barriers for the city's most marginalized and vulnerable communities for achieving what we call transformative change. That it's not the status quo. We want to ensure that the quality of life, that our official plan sets a roadmap for a good quality of life for those that live here and those yet to come. Again, going back to inclusion, is ensuring that we're creating a safe and inclusive city for all Torontonians. And again, the newcomers not yet here. And so, and there's, I'm presenting to you a summary of our draft principles and vision statements and the Indigenous planning perspectives, but they can all be found in a report that went forward in draft that I can ask a member of my team to include in the chat that you can have a read of. We will be continuing our engagement on the Chapter 1 component throughout after the summer, leading into 2023 with a final report in early 2023. Okay, Kristen, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So this is how supportive are you of the official plan vision, and kind of the 3 items there: eliminate disparities, prioritize climate action, and most inclusive city. So many of you have already responded. So it's sitting at close to like 4.5 to 5 range. So quite supportive of the vision that was outlined by Jeff. So maybe we'll go to the next question. So this is how supportive are you of the official plan principles? So those were access, equity, and inclusion. Okay, so we have 4.1, 3.9, and 4.1. Oh, now we have 4.4, 4.2, and 4.4. So most people agreeing with those principles. Okay, so thanks everyone for participating in Menti. That was our last live polling question of the evening, but really was really insightful to hear from you and get that feedback. So as Jeff mentioned, that was the last section for Q&A and the last kind of major presentation component. And we have about 7 minutes left, and Jeff's going to provide a bit of the next steps, and I will provide some next steps in engagement. And we'll also provide some reflections on what we heard tonight from everyone. So Jeff, I'll hand it over to you to provide some reflections on this evening's discussion and some next steps for your team.
Sure, thanks, Kristen. So on the slide is, I've kind of been mentioning them throughout the evening, but next week, sorry, not next week, tomorrow, Planning and Housing Committee will be considering a final report from our colleagues in our environmental policy team on official plan policy updates around environment and climate change. So that'll go tomorrow. And in, again, the July 5th meeting of Planning and Housing Committee, we will finalize MTSAs and PMTSAs, those delineations that Dan earlier presented, and that a subset of our MTSAs, PMTSAs will go there, and then another report will be final employment policies that I presented today, and a subset of our employment area conversions. And as I mentioned, in early 2023, there's no meeting dates yet set, but when they are early in the year, we will finalize the MTSAs that we haven't reported on, and report on final employment area conversions as well. And as I mentioned, a draft we will recommend in a final report changes to official plan, changes to Chapter 1 of the official plan that includes the Indigenous planning perspectives and the vision statement and directions that I earlier presented. Thanks. Next slide, please. I think this is yours, Kristen.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So upcoming meetings. So we've already had the virtual town hall meetings for Etobicoke, Scarborough, and tonight was North York. On Wednesday, we have the meeting for Toronto East York, and then we have a statutory public open house June 7th, and that's a bit of a different time from 1 till 3 p.m. just to allow different opportunities for other people to get to attend these meetings. So then we have 3 policy-focused meetings, and that's to dig a little deeper on specific topics. And they're at towards the end of June, June 21st, June 22nd, and June 23rd. And those are from 5 to 7 p.m. And so the 3 of those, they're listed on the screen: employment lands and the future of work. And then the second one, neighborhoods and complete communities. And then the last one being housing and intensification. So I heard many of you in the chat tonight talking about some of those themes. So if you'll join us again, we'll dig a little deeper into those topic areas. We also do have a new story map live on our plan website. So I'll get Ying to put that in the chat now. So you can access that as well, and you can share it with your friends and colleagues and network in case they missed tonight. It has a lot of this information that you heard tonight. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So I'll just wrap up with saying we did hear a lot of feedback and questions tonight, some about the role of the Ontario Land Tribunal, the challenges when it comes to affordable housing in this city, the need for protecting our employment areas and combining some land uses with light industrial and residential. Heard a lot about the importance of integrating climate change into the official plan, protecting green space and helping that balance with development, and also the community benefits program and integration into secondary plans. So thank you. This is just, I guess, a time for me to say, and on behalf of all the city team and our Dillon team here tonight, thank you so much for your participation this evening. We really appreciate you taking the 2 hours out of this sunny, beautiful summer-like evening, and really appreciate your attendance tonight. So thank you again. Stay in touch, and I hope you engage again in the project. So we'll end it there for tonight. Thanks again. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.